the one biggest element of quantum that attracts me the most is the fact that it's going to be good for humanity.
I fully agree with you that preparation is a real advantage, right?
There's such a fear of hype, and there's such a fear of being too overzealous, because we've seen quantum for decades now be in a position where people will say, oh, it's 5 years away. Quantum will start to solve very soon, within the next decade, I would say, really complex challenges that we've never been able to solve before with any kind of supercomputer that we've had.
What would be your advices to companies, including financial institutions, to get really prepared, and what kind of advantages could they get out of that?
Look at back into the past, right? History has a tendency of repeating itself.
Hello, good afternoon, Matthew. So I'm here with Matt Cimaglia, who is a pretty known investor and advisor in the quantum world. So welcome, Matthew, to in front of our financial industry audience. So I was reading a little bit about you and your profile earlier today, and I saw that you're really an expert in translating innovation into real life applications. And you talked about a framework that you have, or at least that you recommend, to design and to implement to facilitate that transition between innovation and real-time applications. Could you tell us a little bit more about the nature of that framework and its ingredients?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on today. It's such an important topic for me. And candidly, I think going into even this question, quantum in general is a very difficult subject to understand. And, I by no means am a physicist, but I've spent the last 7 or 8 years of my life really focusing on what quantum means and the overall ecosystem play for how quantum can unfold. And it wasn't until 2023 that I really sunk in how important this is for humanity, for multiple cases, but also how truly mature this technology was. We are seeing so many breakthroughs every day that are happening today. But back in 2023, it was maybe every week that we would see something that was coming through. And in terms of, this transformative nature of how to express it and how to get other people on board, it's important for quantum people to talk to non-quantum people. And I spent about a year and a half going to conferences and quickly realized that it was always quantum people talking to other quantum people and patting each other on the back. And unfortunately, in that context, everyone's already in on it. Everyone already is really understanding of the technology, understanding of where things are going. And it wasn't until I realized that I thought, hey, I should leverage this background that I have in communications and helping brands explain something very esoteric out to the world, to more of a mainstream audience.
Yes, that's true that the gap between quantum and industry is extremely high, right? The gap was already quite big as far as AI was concerned, but for quantum, it's even bigger. And finding a common language between quantum people and even financial quants in the financial industry is a real challenge.
Well, I think what you said is poignant, though, is, even AI had a really hard time for decades getting out and explaining to people that it was a real technology, that people were really using it. And it wasn't until there was that ChatGPT moment where
Became more concrete.
it became more concrete, but it became tangible, right? It was something that you and I text each other, or we text relatives or friends, and there's that instant feedback. And
without having to understand how it is
exactly,
being built.
ChatGPT was just another version of that. And I think what's going to be difficult about quantum is what will that moment be when it comes to how we're translating it out as a tangible product.
Yeah, and where to use it, right? Because now we're facing more and more hybrid architecture as far as financial modeling architectures are concerned, where they are building blocks related to classical or machine learning, but also to Gen AI, genetic AI, and now quantum. And it will be quite of a challenge to make sure that these building blocks, right, are quite coherent and talk to each other in a very structured way as well. So I mean, that's where the challenge is, to understand where I can use these different types of technologies to capture value in an entire modeling architecture. So
But also
that
being careful on saying that quantum will replace existing systems. And I think that's another misconception by the general public, if you want to call them that, where I've spoken to people, whether it's potential investors in our fund or even other people, that I'm talking about in other fields. They genuinely come to me and say, okay, well, great. Now I'm going to have to go replace, everything that I have. And I said, no, this is going to
no, no.
be an additional element to what you
Mhm.
already have.
And this precisely where the difficulty would be, right? Where do I really gain an advantage of migrating to quantum? Because they are models that will never gain any advantage, right? They would be overshooting for some problems or wouldn't make any sense for other problems as well. So that means that would require people understanding very well, right? All these technologies together and then the purposes of the thing they try to achieve and which technologies would suit best these purposes. And so in terms of framework, so what you seem to insist on is really the fact that you have to put all the stakeholders together within a kind of structured ecosystem so that this kind of communication, right, becomes quite freed, if I may say so. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're already starting to see some of that success come through the year of quantum security. So YQS 2026, we started this campaign with the Quantum Insider earlier this year, and it's been hugely successful just because we've been able to have a framework around the discussion of Q-Day and what this means for encryption, and again having a lot of this collective voice within the industry going out and saying the same thing over and over. It's that repetitive nature that really helps people start to understand, because we are all really collectively together on this. Like we genuinely talk about this on a weekly or daily
Yeah, yeah.
basis, if you will.
Mhm.
But a lot of times those key message points get mixed up because one person might say one thing and one person might
Yeah.
say another. And
Uh-huh.
really the framework around the year of quantum security was to get a
Yeah,
consistent message around.
exactly.
And
Okay.
again, I see
Very good.
posts now every day that are
Mhm.
regurgitating a lot of the information that we've talked about either collectively or throughout the mission.
Yeah, aligning the messages. That's very important. Yeah, and regarding the Q day, you just mentioned it. I mean, what are the latest, I would say, provisions as far as the Q day is concerned? And anything that you'd like to share?
Look, I think
With-
that the world is talking a lot about the Google report that came out last
Yeah.
week. And, that's now saying that we're looking at RSA and other encryption methods potentially being broken by 2029 now. It's earlier than where they predicted last year. And the notion of that I keep talking to people about is the fact that I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when they said, it was a very far time frame away, and then last year it was condensed in half. Now it's even condensed even further. And that just means that we're using better optimization patterns to go and recognize how we can, build out our quantum systems to then go break these encryption methods. That to me is even more scary because it's putting more pressure on government and almost all industry and individuals that are using any form of encryption, because that could be potentially compromised. And now we're getting into this position that a lot of people that I talk to are saying, well, maybe we'll switch over when the threat actually happens, or when
Mm.
something
Mm.
actually is there. And it's
Mm.
the inverse of that. You should be
Of course.
switching
Yeah.
over your encryption today.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that you're handling any kind of post quantum cryptography, and then you're eliminating potentially that threat of harvesting now and decrypting later.
Yeah, exactly. The clock is already ticking. The risk is already present now, in fact. Yeah. And that's interesting because 29 is indeed 3 years from now, meaning that for the board members of any kind of company, it is really part of their business plan. It should be part of their strategic plan. 3 to 5 years, it is, right? And being myself a board member, I have not seen that many institutions having really structured that as part of their strategic business plan. Still not there.
And
Fully.
again, I think that part of it is because the word quantum is involved. And because people don't understand what quantum is, it's very hard for humans to get their head wrapped around, something new or something untangible, as we described before. And now it is at a point that is so critical. I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and we were talking with lawmakers about this specifically. And, they're trying to educate their colleagues
Yeah.
in DC around why this is so important
Yeah.
for national security, not just for the US, but for our allies.
Yeah, it's a bit frightening indeed. Yeah, and this has nothing to do, the solutions have nothing to do with quantum. I mean, they can at least replace, right? Their traditional encryption algorithm with more advanced algorithms, which do not require quantum computer. They run on a classical computer. So, of course, there are QKD, there are other techniques or true random generation. But, I mean, they can start with already replacing their encryption algorithm. So there are steps that can be taken outside of the quantum world. I mean, this is what is very difficult to understand why they are struggling with those issues, right? It's kind of anyway.
And look, I think that big companies, you have
Yeah,
so many thousands of systems or so many checkpoints that
yeah,
are involved that it's a monumental task just to begin with. And so I think that a lot of the pushback is candidly, it's not a threat today. So we're going to just keep pushing it down the line until it becomes something more important. And at that point, it's, unfortunately going to cost a lot more potentially for these companies to, scramble and pull it together, or, it might be too late
yeah.
for
Uh,
some.
yeah, but what is good is that, I mean, 3 years is really short term. So even for very short termist companies, that becomes essential because board members might still be there in 3 years' time when it materializes. When it's too far away, I mean, some people might think, okay, I will not maybe be responsible for that because I will be gone by then. But it's not
Yeah.
the case because 3 years is really part of their short-term horizon. So that gives me comfort that this will make the industry moving ahead, at least within the financial world that I know. Okay, let's see, but we can't help but convey this very important message. I'd like also to come back on innovation and quantum technologies, but more general innovation. You said something that I find very interesting: the fact that any type of emerging technologies, whether it's AI or what type of AI new developments or quantum, have to be useful, responsible, and built to endure. So, and by reading this, I fully agree with that. Useful, of course, rings a bell in terms of the use cases and the application that the added value they can get from them. But responsible, I mean, what is your experience in terms of companies developing innovations or applications leveraging emerging technologies in a responsible way? I mean, what would be for you the main key KPIs linked to that?
Look, I think that in general, the one biggest element of quantum that attracts me the most is the fact that it's going to be good for humanity. In sort of my positive thinking here, glass half full side of things is the fact that, quantum will start to solve very soon, within the next decade, I would say, really complex challenges that we've never been able to solve before with any kind of supercomputer that we've had or high performance computing. The responsibility is massive for all of these companies to start thinking about it today as soon as possible, because I get really excited when I talk to potential portfolio companies that are building applications and they're thinking about it from a simulation perspective today and not waiting for a quantum computer that has the amount of qubits that they're required in order to run their algorithm on. They're thinking about it from a pure sense of it will take us years to perfect whatever our software platform is, get market traction,
Yeah.
potentially get one or two clients, it's really important that they start today because we don't want that clock to start later on. So I think that's the biggest responsibility of people. And candidly, I think that there's not enough private capital going into quantum because there's the shiny object of AI. And the unfortunate nature of that is there are a lot of starving companies out there or potential companies
Yes.
that
Mhm.
just haven't gotten off the ground yet because they haven't had the nature of any kind of investment.
Oh.
And the problem with some of the government funding is the fact that it's not exactly reliable. This might be something that companies might apply for a grant. They don't know when they're going to receive it or if they're going to receive it. So um, a lot of that has to change, and I think that that's a responsibility of investors to start really truly looking at this as a future potential.
So it's a collective responsibility that we have to make sure that those companies can grow, right? And really bring
Exactly.
huge benefits to humanity in
And
terms
and
of
I
climate, hunger, and yes, food. I mean, we were talking last week with companies dealing with the hunger in the world. I mean, and the food industry, and they all rely very much about what quantum could bring in terms of being able to predict climate impacts,
Yeah, I
also.
mean, but even beyond that,
Mm.
it's who's going to invent a new format for cleaning water, and then who's going to create a better format of electricity or better yet, storage of electricity. So when we're starting to talk about renewable energies, these are a lot of the areas that really excite me.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it is really exciting. And so, and responsible could be also in the sense that I remember that you build a company, right, where for you it was important to democratize, right, the access of those technologies to a grand majority of people. Otherwise, that might create even bigger gaps between the very large companies could afford it and the other ones. So, I mean, how do you see that gap being properly addressed, that
Look,
democratization?
I
Yeah,
think it's important for all of the quantum companies collectively to realize that supporting smaller entrepreneurs or, 1, 2 person teams is just as important as supporting a major enterprise client. Because when you start to look at the comprised nature of potentially thousands of people, it might outweigh even what you see on an enterprise client.
the
Um,
agility is so important.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
agility. I
and
mean,
and when I think
mhm,
about that, I really do get into the fact that these are the people that are also on the ground. They're hearing things that a lot of the enterprise companies don't hear, and they're again to your point, their agility is so much more than if you're a big company or you have multiple layers of bosses, that you have to report to or better yet, shareholders, right? If you're a publicly traded company, you have to report to your shareholders. So I think that there is a huge amount of responsibility on sort of the independent people that are going out there. And these are very creative people. I mean, I come from the creative world and I joke often that I have such a profound respect for the people that I'm talking to on a day-to-day basis because they truly are so much more creative than any of the creatives that I used to work with, at my creative agency. And I look at what they're doing and it's just
mhm.
absolutely remarkable.
Mhm. And sometimes those people get acquired by large companies, and that distracts a little bit their creativity and agility. So, I mean, they have to have access also maybe to architectures or tools, that they could afford buying in the industry. That's also for me, democratization would be about that as well, making sure that everyone can get access to the tool that would allow them deploy quantum into their own applications. Yes, but I think that that's probably the direction into which we are going. But still, I mean, in the financial industry might not always be the case. So in terms of the bridge between sciences, industry, regulators, what do you see as the main issue that prevent those people from really interfacing well with each other into the framework we were discussing earlier on?
And I think it goes back to awareness. A
Mhm.
lot of the lawmakers, a lot of the policymakers out there in government, and I'm not talking just about the US, I'm talking about other governments. Um, there is just such a huge lack of understanding of what quantum is going to bring. With that, I remember the ChatGPT moment happening years ago. I would think it was 2022 or 2023, where immediately in the US, there was this knee-jerk reaction by Congress that they immediately had to call in all of the heads of all of the technology companies to sit there and explain and talk about a framework around how to essentially, police AI.
Mhm.
And, at that point, the cat was already out of the bag. I mean, it was already out there and people were using it regularly,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they missed the point of the fact that it had already been around for years, as I described earlier. And that to me is one of those elements today that these lawmakers and these policymakers need to go out there and truly educate themselves. And there are so many amazing resources that you can start looking at that, you don't have to understand how something works. Again, I always use the reference of my mom doesn't know how to program an iPhone, but yes, she uses it every day. So she has this understanding of how something is working. And that's something that a lot of these lawmakers need to understand.
Yeah, right. And it would be nice for quantum that they do not miss the train, that they come up with kind of, I would say, guidelines and I would say a little bit before it is fully deployed, right? Because
I'd
when
rather
you
ha- I'd rather these people have the debates today
today,
and really get into it, because by the time it does happen, I would rather them say, "What took you so long?" as
yeah,
opposed to, "We're
exactly.
going to put up
Yeah.
more guardrails."
Yeah, exactly. Because when they start to be afraid of what's going on, that's the point where they start to really issue guidelines that do not make really sense, right? That prevent the business from being innovative because they can't understand it. So that's a real danger for the industry as well. So we have to have them on board now. Indeed, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And also when you see how AI has been deployed today within the industry, I mean, it's quite of being a little bit chaotic. And from a governance viewpoint, those frameworks should have been put in place prior to allowing such a massive deployment within the industries. Because now we are discussing with some of the financial industries on how to validate and how to control Gen AI or agentic AI are not being validated the way they used to validate a model or a machine, even a machine learning or deep learning model. So I mean, all of these questions are now coming on the table, but it's really late,
Yeah, and
huh?
again, I think that it just goes back to
Mm,
quantum companies in general, and I'm using this across the board. So whether it's networking, sensing, compute, algorithms, it is so important to explain with reference to something that exists today.
yeah.
This is just a better version of something so that it's a lot more tangible or a lot more
Mhm,
understood of what
mhm.
this will become into the future.
Definitely coming up with use cases and yeah, and examples of real applications. And to your opinion, I see what's going on a little bit in the financial industry that there are not so many use cases that really make a difference at the moment. We're working on some of them that could be like, for instance, we're talking about resilient economic models. So we are working on a resilient balance sheet, for instance. What's your view cross industries about those use cases? Are you personally happy with the way they are being developed at the moment or the speed of
No, I mean, look, I think that
yeah,
in general, I'm working with two financial services companies right now on building out use cases around quantum. And our hope is that by the end of the year, we'll be able to publish them. I would say that because there's such a lack of funding for these individuals that are working in the quantum world, it's really difficult for them to spend the time and energy on
yeah,
something that isn't going to bring them immediate income. So I think there's just a huge lack of
yeah,
tools or publications out there that aren't put on by major corporations or major industry partners. They are great. They are incredible when they come out, but they're not telling the full story. And I do believe that, once this momentum really starts to pick up in the quantum industry
yeah,
in the next 2 to 5 years,
yeah.
I think that we're going to see a very different landscape than where we are today.
Yeah, definitely. It's all again a question of funding, right? Making sure that people can focus on those use cases that might not be fully, I would say, valuable let's say profitable at the moment for some companies, but that create that are there to
Yeah, and,
create.
and in my experience as well, it's these are brilliant individuals that candidly don't want to talk to other people that often. They're very good in their own bubble or in their own academic setting, but these are people that are not going out there every day and, being very public about what they're doing from a work perspective because candidly, they're very proud of what they're doing, but they're not great communicators at
No, no,
telling the
no.
world of
No,
what they're
yeah.
doing.
No, but I saw it's interesting. The BIS issued a paper, I think, this week regarding quantum Bayesian, I would say, interferences. Also, so the BIS has very good people to work on that, but the paper remains very theoretical and abstract. And I guess that there will be nobody afterwards to try to make it a real application, right? That's what we try to achieve as well.
But I think
Yeah.
also to the defense of
Yeah.
some of the folks, there's such a fear of hype and there's such a fear of being too overzealous because we've seen quantum for decades now be in a position where people will say, oh, it's 5 years away. And then it's another 5 years away. And I've talked to, a very large investment partner about a year ago, and they invested in some quantum companies almost 10 years ago, and they lost a significant amount of money on that. And it was because they were very early, or their
Yeah.
thesis didn't allow for
They
them to
couldn't
have very
stand.
patient. Yeah, they weren't ready for the wait. And I think candidly, some of the world has heard about quantum is a little bit skeptical. And I don't blame them because when they did hear some of the hype years ago, um, things didn't exactly come to fruition how they thought it would. And now, though, I do believe that we're in a very finite position of a 2-year window where we're going to see a lot of early, exploratory companies coming out and formalizing themselves. And then to your point that you made earlier, potentially even be acquired by some of the bigger companies because I think it's a huge opportunity for them because there's such a lack of talent in the industry. We need to build the workforce more. But there's also a lack of IP out there. So it's a huge win for anyone that's going to be acquiring in the next 2 to 5 years.
And for the large
That there's
companies, yeah,
yeah,
they're
there
better
there's
to
going to be a lot
understand
of
the topics,
talent out
right?
there.
To be able to be among the first ones to acquire those companies and realize the potential that those companies have. If they do not prepare themselves for such acquisitions, they might not do the right
Mhm.
ones.
Yeah, I
Once
mean, look at back into the past, right? History has a tendency of repeating itself. And when I look at the early days of social media and when Instagram was acquired, I think it was like 8 employees, and it was in somebody's like basement practically. But that was a huge acquisition, and if you look at it from today's perspective, Meta underpaid for that asset. But what they gained was a huge amount of users, but more importantly, a really innovative tech and really innovative people. So it's that human capital that
yeah,
also played a huge role in that. And that's
Mhm.
what I see a lot of the companies that we're looking at for our portfolio is we're seeing, these 2 to 5 person teams that are just extraordinary in what they're doing, and they're
Mhm.
doing a lot with nothing. And I just think about it is if they had the resources to go and
That would be.
actually have,
Mm.
the backing of a very large
Mhm.
company,
Mhm.
we could
Mhm.
accelerate the pace of quantum in general.
Yeah, that's for sure. If those companies again can integrate them properly, right? Because those people being creative might be quite difficult, to motivate and manage. I mean, I've had myself the experience for that, and it's not always easy. So that's where the framework, I would say, and what you're doing is quite interesting because you make sure that those two parties
But I
can
but I also
communicate
think it's
very
it's
well
rising tide
together.
lift all boats. That's a common saying that I sort of use. And I even look at what Quantum Nation is doing, and it's incredible. I think, Christoph and his team, incredibly brilliant individuals. They're, really big investors in the space, obviously. And, I look at some of the other, funds that are forming, the one in Denmark from last year,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that
others. And I think that there needs to be more of that. And
more of
that's
it.
what excites me the most. But
Yeah.
it's so different from what we've seen in the past from Silicon Valley, where it was very cutthroat. It was very competitive. It was, I want this, you can't have it, very secretive. I talk regularly with other investors in the space and we share information with each other or we share ideas with each other because the ecosystem is so fragile right now and because there are so few of us. It's really important to have this notion that, we are really all in this together and we genuinely want to see this succeed.
Yeah. No, that's for the benefits of everyone, right? Definitely. At this stage, it makes a lot of sense indeed. And so you were also saying that for quantum, you would expect that people do not only focus on outcome, but also lasting impact. So in the funds that you're dealing with, this notion of impact is properly reflected already, or is it?
I think it's just naturally
Yeah.
there. Anyone that we invest in or we're looking to invest in um, is providing some sort of meaningful impact. And whether it's direct or indirect, meaning they're part of the supply chain for something that will become. Um, I think that it's hard to argue that any of the potential companies that we
Mhm.
invest in wouldn't have a huge impact.
No. But is it considered as among the KPIs? I mean, is there a way of making it quite tangible together with the financial performance, or is it something more qualitative, like you would say, indeed,
Yeah, I
my
think it's more
money?
qualitative. I genuinely, we're not going out actively saying that we want to be impact investors. Obviously, that's a good thing to have, but
Yeah, it's
I think just naturally it's there.
it is there naturally. And then I would conclude with the fact that for you, and I fully agree with you, that preparation is a real advantage, right, out there in the market. So, what would be your advices to companies, including financial institutions, to get really prepared, and what kind of advantages could they get out of that? If you could maybe
Well,
summarize.
I think that with any cycles,
Yeah.
especially right now, what we're looking at from the geopolitics, or whether we have a recession potentially down the road, or
Mhm.
prices spike because of supply chain demands that are not being met. I think having that dry powder and having the ability to invest in quantum in the next couple of years is going to be critical for quantum. So we are actively thinking about this every day from the perspective of even AI. So if there is a bubble for AI, God forbid, we don't
Mhm.
want to be in a position where we're not able to deploy capital. And because of the timeline of quantum and what we've all been discussing, I think it would be really critical for people to be thinking about how they're building their businesses in the next couple of years and where they're getting those investment dollars, whether it's a combination of private capital and non-dilutive or government capital and grants,
Mhm.
or if they're going to be able to survive off of some
Yeah.
grants for a couple of years before they're out going and doing a bigger raise, if you will. So I know a few quantum companies that have only ever gotten grants, and I think it's incredible that they've been able to build such a massive business without any external private
Mhm.
capital,
Mhm.
and I give them a lot of credit. But I talked to those
Yeah.
founders, and it was a really tough road to get there. But
Mhm.
again, I
Yeah.
think it's just being creative. Again, thinking about this in different mindsets, and
Mhm.
being just very proactive today,
Yeah.
and not waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, so for large bank or insurance companies or any kind of financial institutions, that would make a lot of sense for them to partner with this kind of creative teams, allowing them to grow for the
Hmm.
benefits of everyone. That would be a nice way of making a significant contribution to quantum for their own applications, but also to make sure that the market grows
Yeah,
in these fields, because we are clearly lacking use cases and applications. So very good. So very interesting. Thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciated very much our
it's such a
conversation.
pleasure.
And I wish you good luck for, for all your activities, and talk to you certainly soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day. Bye.